Hi, everyone. It is November 12th, 2020. This is our real estate video conference, and I'll be starting shortly. So hi, welcome back. And again, this is November 12th, 2020, and this is a real estate conference. I wanted to update you on real estate because I have so many people calling, wanting to buy. They've been renting for a while. They see that home prices are going crazy. They're seeing that the mortgage interest rates are at an all-time low. And even though housing is largely unaffordable, or they might be spending 40% of their budget, they're still very tempted to just buy in. Fear of missing out, feeling like you're paying so much in rent that you might just be throwing away money, and at least that could be building up towards equity. I would caution you that anyone who bought high before the Great Recession would be cautioning you right now, because buying high and having the value of your home drop precipitously, and especially if it goes below the loan value, can be sheer hell. And it can be very difficult to extricate yourself from this. It can take years. Your credit score gets ruined. I want to remind you that 1/3 of your credit score is your assets to debt ratio. So you could be making every mortgage on time, paying off every credit card. And if the value of your home is dropped well below your mortgage, then your credit score is going to be very bad. So one other thing, there are still 3.5 million homeowners who have severely underwater mortgages. And this is with real estate prices at an all-time high. This is a statistic that is not really reported on. I know a few of these people because they get into trouble, and they of course call me up to help them out, to ask me to help them out. So I won't get into all the logistics of this, but a lot of people with loan mods are getting these kinds of deals where the bank is saying, okay, we'll give you a loan mod, but we're going to pack on all the penalties and fees and unpaid payments onto the loan itself. And then they might have a home that's worth $800,000, and the new loan mod loan value is now 1.2 million. So there's a lot more shadow inventory than you might be aware of as well. So we'll talk about all of that in opportunities and challenges in real estate in 2021. I'm going to show you a lot of statistics, but the bottom line is there are 8 considerations that you should be using right now if you're really interested in purchasing real estate. And if you get all 8 of those considerations right, then now could be a great time to buy. You're going to have to look in other places in order to do that, because in most markets, real estate is at an all-time high, and it's largely unaffordable to the people who live there. But that doesn't mean it's not possible to do it. So let's talk about what's possible, and let's show you a few case studies. And we will also, and happy stories and happy endings. All right, so I'm going to share the screen and start talking through this, but do remember that all 8 of these points are in my new blog. Just go to nataliepace.com/blog, and all 8 of those tips are there, including comments on each one. Okay, so I'll share the screen. All right, so the name of the blog is Real Estate and Housing, the Challenges and Opportunities. Now, what you're going to find first off, and a chart that I want to show you right away, is this one. So home rents and home prices are far higher in most markets today than they were, 10 years ago. So you're seeing places like Los Angeles where the median home price since 2010 has almost doubled. Phoenix is 144% increase. Now, a lot of these were ones that had gone way down in the Great Recession. Los Angeles lost half, Phoenix lost more than half, Las Vegas lost more than half. So a lot of the markets, Tucson hasn't gone up as much as Phoenix or Vegas. So a lot of the markets that went skyrocketing were the ones that have gone crazy this time around. Now, also rents are really expensive. So that's probably why a lot of people who are renting right now really want to buy, because they say, if I'm going to spend $2,000 or $3,000 a month on rent, I would rather it go towards equity. I understand that. And I think that that's a good way of thinking. However, that's not the only consideration. And that's why I want you to get 8 considerations in the mix. All right, let's go back to a couple more things. All right, so real estate prices are high, whether you're renting or you're buying. They are largely unaffordable to the people who live in a lot of these cities. So as just one example, in Marin County, you would have to put 106% of the average income earner's wages towards housing. So in other words, way more money than they make. Same thing in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego can be like that. So in a lot of these markets, we're not even talking about spending 40% of your income. We're talking about this not possible for the average person. Now that also can reduce the buying power, right? So anytime you have a mismatch there where you have more sellers than buyers, then the prices have to go down so that the buyers will buy it. Right now, we don't have that. What we have is what they're calling a shortage of supply. And so when people go out there to buy and they're looking on the multiple listing services and they're not seeing much available, then they are having to pay retail, right? And that has led many of the industry experts to say that prices and prices have gone up. And they're saying prices are going to continue to go up into 2021. Now, I do encourage you to read my or read my blog, listen to my interview with Mike Fratantoni. He is the chief economist of the Mortgage Bankers Association. And yes, as long as people are shopping in the multiple listing, and as long as they're not looking in the shadow inventory, then you're going to pay retail and you're going to be seeing prices increasing. But that's not the whole story that's happening. So here's one story that I want to tell you. And I think it's something that we should factor in the mix. And it is something that is not being factored into the mix by these economists of the real estate agencies like the National Association of Realtors. So what we're seeing is a couple of things. Intergenerational housing is now higher than it's ever been, well, since the Great Depression. I said depression, not recession. So the amount of 18 to 29-year-olds who are living with a parent today is higher than it was in 1930. That should tell you something. And the interesting thing, I was in New York during the height of the pandemic, and maybe a third of the people in the building I was in were there. Everybody else had gone to a country home. Now, they're saying, okay, look, people that can did, but people that couldn't didn't. So they're saying it's not the same in Brooklyn or Queens. But in Manhattan, there's a lot of vacancies in a lot of these buildings. Same thing in San Francisco. So what's really interesting is everybody would say that in New York and San Francisco, you had a shortage of housing. But then the pandemic hits. And now what we're seeing is that there are opportunities. Now, it's still overpriced, but there's a lot more availability on the markets. So in San Francisco and New York, we've seen prices drop by over 4%, sometimes up to 5%. In San Francisco, the listings themselves have gone up 96% year over year. So what we're seeing is that even though the industry experts are saying that the supply is short, through these new trends, like millennials deciding, well, screw it, if I can live anywhere, I'll go to the suburbs, I'll move back in with mom and dad, and we'll make it work for now. And that way we can all save enough money and we can protect our wealth and keep it more in the family. That creates more supply. So it is possible that more supply can be created just by smart people deciding that they're not going to spend 50% of their income to live in a city where they can't even, have the amenities that they liked. So I think it's important to realize that trends can shift rapidly. And again, San Francisco and New York City are proof of that. They still are overpriced, but they are proof that trends can shift very rapidly. So here's this 8-point checklist that I want you to be aware of. That A, you want to think of your home as a sanctuary. B, you do not want to be spending too much on housing. Um, so let's talk about that. The Thrive budget says 50% to survive and 50% to thrive. So someone came to me recently and their average income is about $75,000 a year. They said that they were pre-qualified for a $500,000 or a $600,000 loan. Now that would mean that their payments on a 30-year loan for $600,000 could be $30,000 a year. That's 40% of their income. If you're only supposed to spend 50% on basic needs, what that means is that they might be in a position where they have to put food on credit cards. So you have to understand that it's not sustainable for you to overspend what your budget can allow for. Now, there are ways to solve that problem. For instance, maybe you should even think bigger. Maybe instead of thinking, okay, I'll qualify for a $500,000, $600,000 house and my girlfriend and I would live there, you might think of, well, maybe I could get like $1 million 4 or 5 bedroom house and rent out 2 of the rooms. And that way we can afford it. And that ends up being only 28% of our budget. So again, you want to get creative, but you do not want to just go for what you qualify for without factoring in your budgeting, because that is a sure recipe for disaster. I spell out a lot of the reasons why in the blog, so I strongly recommend you to check that out. Okay, back to our checklist. Intergenerational housing. It's a trend because housing has become unaffordable. Now, you might say, well, that's, I don't want to live with my parents or I don't want to live with my kids. But if you think of it differently, if we all pitch in, then we can take more vacations. If we all pitch in, then my kids can save up to buy their own home and they can shop in the shadow inventory. Maybe they can find something that they can actually afford. So when you think about it from a 10-year perspective, rather than just a me right now moment, it can make a lot more sense. Again, I do recommend that you think bigger anyway, because buying a bigger home and having some roommates or renting it out or even embracing the intergenerational housing means that there's more people helping to afford that place. I still want you to buy it for a good price, but having a little bit of it be income producing can be part of the success formula as well. Okay, so the 3 ingredient recipe for cooking up profits is very key, and it's going to be very difficult to get the third ingredient right. And you will not get it right at all if you are shopping on the multiple listing services. So you want to start with what you know and love. You want to pick the leader, and then you want to buy low and sell high, or buy low and keep it in the family. A lot of people like to keep real estate in the family. So how can you do that? So again, the first ingredient, start with what you know and love, that has a lot to do with sanctuary home. You want to live in a community with your people. You don't want to live in a community where you feel unsafe or you feel like an outsider, or you don't think the schools are right for your children, or that you don't feel like you can walk down the street and say hi to your neighbors, or maybe they don't share the same values as you do. So this is really an important part of it. A lot of times people are going at it the other way and they're saying, I'd really like to live here, but can't afford it. So I'll go ahead and go live here. Or you might even have the real estate agent say, this area is experiencing a renaissance. Boy, have I heard that about downtown Los Angeles. And I went down there and visited, and I'm sorry. I think that a lot of people who bought into that idea are having a difficult time right now. So you really want to look at the neighborhood that you're interested in, different times of the day, at night, in the morning, early in the morning, and know what the ethos of the city is. I mean, I love Santa Monica so much because it also shares a lot of my ethos. So there's micro mobility. It's 100% renewable powered. They are starting to work on a project to have it be water independent. So it shares a lot of my values, and I feel proud being here. So that's the way that you want to feel. Now, picking the leader can also be something that you create, right? Like if you are a fixer-upper person and you see the rundown place in a beautiful neighborhood, and that's going to give you a good value, then of course you create the leader, right? By having the vision of saying, I see opportunity here. Now, again, the third ingredient is buy low. And if the real estate prices are pretty much at an all-time high nationwide, there may be some areas that are not yet at an all-time high, but many areas are, then you're going to have to shop in the shadow inventory. And there is shadow inventory. So we will talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so what is the shadow inventory? Let's say, for instance, that you're looking at, I've been telling you that I know a lot of people that have underwater mortgages. Those people are not going to show up on the multiple listing services. However, they might be some of the people who are not paying their mortgage right now. And if we go back to my blog, there were over 11 million folks who were not paying their rent and their mortgage. Let me see if I can just hit that real quickly. That statistic. Okay, I didn't hit it in there, but in September, what we saw was that 11 million households did not make their payments, whether it was rent or mortgage. We also saw that 40% of students did not pay their student loan debt. So there's a lot more distress going on than people are aware of. And the reason that you're not hearing the headlines on it is because there's been a moratoria on evictions, rental evictions, and foreclosures. So right now you might be shopping in the shadow inventory and saying, well, nothing's going up, nothing's happening. Well, have a little patience. Those moratoria are scheduled to end at the end of this year. They can't go on forever. They might extend it a little bit, but they can't go on forever. So let's say, for instance, that you're looking at RealtyTrack, and that's RealtyTrack without the K.com. You can also look at auctions.com. And if we click on the map in Los Angeles, what we see is that there is a lot more pre-foreclosures, auctions, and bank-owned that you might realize. So let's go ahead and take a bigger look at this area. So there you go. A lot more in the shadow inventory than you might have realized. So you might say, okay, well, how do you shop in the shadow inventory? Yeah, it takes a little bit. So I often say, why don't you look at the county tax liens? Because those are going to tell you who probably isn't paying their mortgage. And then you have the exact address. You can go look at the house. You could write a letter to the homeowner. Look, a lot of homeowners are not aware that they could siphon every cent out of their 401k to try to stay in a home that they can't afford, that may even be underwater on the mortgage. And the minute they don't pay it, the bank's still going to try to foreclose on them. So by you contacting them early, and the banks may be interested in short sales, because that's an alarming map. And again, not all the areas are going to look like this, but this is Los Angeles. This is one of the most unaffordable areas. This is one, if you're shopping in the if you're not shopping in the shadow inventory, you're buying really high. then, again, it is worth it. It's going to be more boots on the ground. But if you can get a 35% discount by doing the work and going into a short sale and negotiating and maybe educating the homeowners so that they don't burn through all of their retirement, they actually have a lifeboat to restart their lives, then everybody can win in that scenario. Again, it's more work for you, but then if you've already got a 35% discount on the price, if the prices fall precipitously, maybe your mortgage never goes underwater. And if it goes under a little bit, it's not going to be as bad as if it went under a lot. And again, if you've applied all of the other things, you've purchased a sanctuary home that you can afford, maybe even have it be a little income producing for you, then you can write out if we do have bad times. This is an unprecedented recession. It doesn't feel like it because we gave a bunch of people a bunch of money, and including corporations, so they wouldn't declare bankruptcy and they'd keep people that weren't working paid. So there's a lot of propping up, house of cards going on. That is a short-term fix. It's not a midterm or long-term fix. So have a little patience, because when we have pandemics and recessions, prices for real estate typically drop. Now you might say, well, what's the timeline on that? Okay, let's look at the last timeline. So in 2006, it was the high for real estate. The recession started in 2007. And then the low for real estate prices wasn't until 2011. It took 5 years to hit the low. However, it was pretty low by 2009. So again, if you're just got your foot on the gas right now, and we're, early in this recession and it's been propped up, so they're at all-time highs and everybody thinks there's no supply, but they're not factoring in intergenerational housing or underwater mortgages or people who haven't paid but haven't been evicted yet or foreclosed on yet. So there may be more opportunity hiding in the shadow inventory. Have a little patience and have a plan. More details. So if we go back to our checklist, we've talked about shopping in the shadow inventory. Hard assets typically will hold their value better than paper assets when we have too much paper floating around. So we spend one full day on what's safe at the investor educational retreats that I teach, because bonds are not safe. That would typically be where you got safe in your nest egg, right? But they're negative yielding and they're illiquid. So they're a real problem. Now, you don't just want to buy real estate high. And now you have to, if you're thinking of income producing, I know a lot of landlords that are in trouble because they have squatters now who are not paying rent that they can't evict, and they still owe on their own mortgage. So you do have to think of what will produce income in a post-pandemic world. So intergenerational housing is making more sense. All right. So if you're thinking of transferring some of your paper assets into an income producing hard asset, remember that every single word in that sentence really matters. It has to be a safe income producing hard asset that you purchase for a good price, considering what will produce income in a post-pandemic world. That's a mouthful. But you want to get it right, because once you purchase real estate, you own it. You own it for better, you own it for worse. And again, extricating yourself is not always that easy. It's an illiquid asset. You don't like stock, you can push sell and it's done. Real estate, not that easy, especially if the buyers dry up because the prices are too high. So have a 10-year plan at least too. Now, will real estate ever be affordable again? You know, it's interesting because whenever things are at their all-time high, what the salesmen do is say, hey, this area never goes down in value. It didn't go down in the Great Recession. Well, the areas that I've looked at where they've made that claim, like Boulder and Vancouver, they really were, they didn't go that far up before the Great Recession. And that's why they didn't go down. This time they have gone very far up and they're largely unaffordable. So it's a different story. They try to tell you it doesn't go down in recessions, but there was a reason it didn't go down the last time. And there's a reason why it should go down this time. So you can't just rely on what the salesman is going to tell you, because they want to sell houses and they really aren't looking out for your best interest. They do want to try to find the house that you would like to buy, but they're not thinking, can you really afford this? Are you reaching out a little over your skis? Is this going to put you in trouble? Is the price going to drop? That's not the things that they're thinking about. Those are the things that you have to be thinking about, because you're the boss of your money and you're going to own the home. Now, also, you have to factor in climate change and natural disasters, because what's interesting is that if you do look at this chart, what you see here is that Virginia Beach this is in Virginia, has barely gone up. Now, Virginia Beach is one of the areas that is having right now severe problems with rising sea levels. When you think of the areas like Houston or New Orleans or parts of the Caribbean, we've actually had our first climate refugees on an island off of Louisiana. Arizona is massive droughts, and they actually have water wars going on in some of the rural areas. So you really have to factor in, how has the climate changed in this area? And does the local community have the resources to protect the homes and the inhabitants of the people who live here? Also, you want to factor in the 4Ds, because that can change the equation as well. So it's death, divorce, depression, and disasters. So, anytime you see of major flooding, then the prices are going to go down. Anytime you see a major earthquake, the prices can go down. Fire can create prices to go down. So you just want to make sure that, if you are going to buy into that area, that same disaster is not going to happen in another 2 years, and then you're the one that's going to be in trouble. Also, insurance rates can be extremely high in areas that are prone to natural disasters, and that can price you out of the market. So you always have to check on those kind of things in addition to the price of the home. So those are 8 things that you should be looking at when you're buying your home. And again, you might say, well, that's just too much. I just want to buy it now. You're not going to feel that way once you own it. If you buy it and you force yourself to buy it because you're just sick of paying high rent, and then you own it and it's too much for you to afford, and you start taking on debt, or you had a thought about renting it and you get somebody who can't pay their rent because we're in a severe recession. These are things that you want to already have planned. You want a good blueprint. You want your home to be fiscally sound so that it can hold up to the economic storms that are here with us right now, and even more so on the horizon. So getting all this right, taking your foot off the gas on the purchase and putting your head into the weeds of what you should be doing. They call it in investing, stick to your knitting. So you have this action plan and you go through it methodically and you start sounding your soul. What would be my sanctuary home? And how can I start shopping in the inventory and maybe look at some of the homes that are either underwater or where they're behind on their mortgage? And should I contact that homeowner directly? Again, just because you contact the homeowner and just because they might find a way to get you a 35% discount, that doesn't mean that it's affordable. So all of these things have to match up. It should be purchasing it for a good price, and it should be something you can afford where you would like to live there for at least 10 years. Okay, there's more to consider from some of the people who sent in questions. So, oh, before I get to the questions, I did want to show you one case study. And I think that this one, and I will play it for you at the end of this teleconference, the whole thing. So I have a couple, and they came to me actually in 2011. They came to an investor educational retreat. At that time, on the safe side, we were saying, look, if you don't own a home, now is the time to buy, because even 2009 to 2012, most people, you could really have purchased a home in most markets for much lower than you could have rented a home. And of course, the mortgage interest rates were very low. And even if you bought then and the interest rates are lower, you can always refinance and get them even lower. So this particular gentleman who came to the retreat, he bought the house. And then I was in Vegas. He bought a house in Vegas. And in 2017, he had a family now. He had a wife and he had a son. And they had had a soul searching journey in Peru. And they no longer felt like Vegas was the place for them. And so they wanted to actually move to British Columbia, and they wanted to build an off grid home. And fortunately, they had doubled their money on the purchase they made in Vegas and the low. And then they were able to leverage that into this new sanctuary home. So that was having a vision of sanctuary home, something that felt right to them when they were, before kids, and didn't feel right to them after kids. But they did have that first 10-year plan that worked for them great in Vegas. And now they have, the next plan that's more centered around the education and the life experience that they want to create for their child. So I will show you that at the end, because I think it's very inspiring. And I want you to know that when you get it right, and you're patient about it, then it can really transform your life. If you get it wrong and you just do it because you're sick of things, or you want to be part of making money on real estate, you're chasing returns, and it's perilous to your financial health. It's perilous to your marriage. It's perilous to your emotional health. Buying high and hoping that it'll go higher can have severe consequences for your relationships and your health, and definitely your physical health. So a couple of questions that came in that I would like to answer. So one of them was talking, and this is not real estate related. This one was about ARK Investments. So this is a brokerage. So ARK Investments invests solely in disruptive innovation. Now, those of you who have been to my retreats know that our easy as a pie chart nest egg strategies is a diversified plan. It definitely wants to include hot areas like disruptive innovation. So ARK Investments is basically kind of like HOTS. It's like your 4 hot slices. What they're missing are your Jabba the Hutts and maybe some other industries that are not necessarily disruptive innovation, but we use every day. And so they're reliable and steady, and maybe even pay you a dividend. Disruptive innovation will not pay you a dividend. Now, right now, we're not getting paid great dividends anymore. There's reasons for that, but eventually we will. So again, I don't think that you'd want to go all in on disruptive innovation. There's another issue with also these smaller companies. So if you go to nataliepace.com, you can see in my Twitter feed that I, again, you don't even have to sign up for Twitter. You can just scroll through my Twitter feed. But one thing that I put up there was this one about, this is Beam, was a smaller company. financial services company, and they were actually FDIC insured, but depositors haven't had access to their money for months. Now, this will probably resolve itself because it was FDIC insured, but we've seen with some of these companies that it can take years to resolve. So right now, when we have so much financial distress in our corporations, and by the way, it's not limited to like Boeing and airlines and auto manufacturers and retail and commercial real estate and travel and hospitality. Over 50% of the S&P 500 is at or near junk bond status, and most of the banks, the big ones, are one rung above junk bond status. That includes Goldman Sachs, that includes Wells Fargo, it includes Citi, it includes Capital One, it includes Discover. Now, this particular financial services company might be so small that you don't really know how well capitalized it is. It's new. It's only from 2014. We also saw, and you and I, the person that asked me this question, we saw this, companies like Direccion that had a 3 times gold bull fund, even though gold is higher than it's ever been, the fund is not living up to its former name. They had to change it to a 2 times bull fund, gold bull fund, and it's not living up to that name either. So these financial services companies can get into trouble. MF Global declared bankruptcy in 2011. The investors eventually got their money back, but it did take over 18 months to do that. So I think that right now, even, I'm moving out of Power Shares and into iShares, because Power Shares, owned by Invesco, is a BBB company, one rung above junk. And iShares is owned by BlackRock, which is a double A, and triple A is the highest. So I think that there's twofold on that one. The next question that came in from a couple that live in Vancouver, and they're renting, and they're just anxious to buy, and of course for all the reasons that we already talked about. Now, again, Vancouver is one of the areas that is unaffordable. So there will come a time when there will be fewer buyers. Let me see, I think it's here. So this, if you wish, ask for this link, just email Heather. You can email her at info@nataliepace.com. But if you go to this link and you look at Vancouver, you can see that the average person would have to spend 86% of their income in order to buy a home there. So that's not sustainable. Whenever you see things that just don't make sense, they can't go on like that forever. They can go on like that for a little bit of time. Now, you were interested in Vancouver Island, which you felt was more affordable. So go through that other checklist. Is this a sanctuary home for you? Is this something that's going to be affordable? Can you shop in a shadow inventory there and maybe find something that's priced less? Or are you comfortable with going ahead and just buying it? And if it does lose ground or lose value, that you're going to live there for the rest of your life, so you don't really care. You're going to have to factor in all of these things, and only you know what's the right answer for you. Now, the last question, and the other question was, what about who is the financial gurus for real estate in Canada and the US, etc.? I always think it's a better idea to go with the data rather than a person, because any guru always has something to sell you. It might be that they're selling you real estate. So like trusting a real estate broker to give you all this information, that's really not as smart as you might think, because they have an incentive to sell you something. And so they might give you information that's skewed in that manner. But the data doesn't lie. So if you're going from the data, and if you're going through a checklist, and if you're looking for shadow inventory, again, look on the government websites. Who's behind on their mortgage? Who's behind on their taxes? Are there auctions in the area that I could participate in? So start educating yourself that way in my book. And again, I found a few websites for Canada that were data oriented that I think were really good ones to look at. Again, sometimes they're going to be measuring what's going on right now, and the projections they have in the future are not considering things. So when, if you listen to my interview with Mike Fratantoni, it's a good interview and it's very informative. But when I ask him about intergenerational housing, you can tell he hasn't factored it in. So when I talked to him about home prices and the vacancies in New York and San Francisco, he hasn't really factored it in as much, or he might say that that's more of an anomaly. But to have San Francisco availability listings double in a few months tells you that things can shift rapidly. So don't be in a rush right now. Prices are unaffordable and they're at an all-time high. You're going to have to create your own opportunities. All right. So thank you for joining me. Be sure to go through that 8-point checklist. I want to share Alvin Tam's story with you. By the way, it's only a 4-minute film, and he does the films for Cirque du Soleil, the marketing and the promotions. So it's very well done. So it's worth your time, and it is inspiring. So that's what I want to leave you with, is that when you do it right, it can be a blessing. When you do it wrong, it can be sheer hell. So it's worth it to get it right, because a home is something you're going to own for a while, and there can be unexpected expenses that come up. It might need a new roof, it might need new plumbing, there might be a natural disaster, the insurance might be more expensive than you were counting on. All of these things are things you need to be factoring in. All right, so I'm going to play you Alvin Tam's 4-minute video, and I hope it inspires you on what you can achieve. He worked very, 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 very hard to create this beautiful home. And it's inspiring.
I believe there's a respect that comes from that type of experience that grows when you see yourself no longer as a user of a resource and more as a partner of your surroundings, of your nature.
The regal connection that we are cultivating now in our life for the sake of our child and the children of the future and our inherent connection to the earth is the kind of connection that keeps us awake, alive, integrated, and one with our natural environment. What is our why? Why would we leave the most fantastic plastic city in the world to be immersed in the wilderness? What is that story about?
When we left Las Vegas, we set out on a journey to very much an unknown place. We knew in our hearts that living in Las Vegas, living in a big city, any big metropolitan city, was not the right way for us to express our values. Our values had changed. Inside, we felt that it was the time to seek out an experience that would truly teach us about living with our world in harmony.
So as much as Las Vegas was fun and exciting and full of opportunity as a performing artist, as a yoga teacher, a dancer, it was time for something new, and it was time to evolve and to come into a new way of living. Fortunately, we had a lot of opportunities there in Las Vegas, working with celebrities, Alvin being a performer at Cirque du Soleil for so many years. Very grateful to have had that experience. And the evolution of our path and our journey in raising a child really started to show us that there was something more and something missing.
What it really is a teaching that reminds us that we are really in partnership with nature. We are partners with the environment. We are just one of many elements of this world. There it is!
Yes!
All right, guys, I really appreciate your time. I encourage you to search your soul and decide what a sanctuary home would look like for you and exactly where that would be. And to keep the money in the family and embrace the trends of intergenerational housing. This will create opportunities in more affordable housing. And things have gone a bit crazy. And the other thing is to understand that things are being propped up right now by a moratorium on rental evictions and on foreclosures. That is set to expire December 31st, 2020. Can it be extended? Yes, for a short time, but not forever. So if you are seeing that nothing is up for auction or foreclosures haven't changed, blah, 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 just be a little patient. Your fear of missing out on increasing real estate prices, that's not a good reason to buy a home. You're actually going to have to live there. It's not a good reason to pay 40% of your income and put food on credit cards or worry about maybe you can't afford even the smallest emergency, which happens more frequently when you're actually the homeowner than when you're the renter. So take this seriously and just understand that every time when people think that prices can never come down and that there's no reason why they can and the supply is so limited, that there's always a way for the crafty person. So stick to your knitting, look at that 8-point checklist, and start visioning and creating and planning for something that's going to really work for you for the next 10 years. And then figure out how to create that opportunity and create that price. All right. I thank you again for joining me. You can do this, but you can't do it if you rush into it or try to rationalize it, or if you just listen to the real estate salesman. All right. I'll see you next time. And thanks again for joining me. I really appreciate your time. Bye now.